Go.
All right, well, guys, welcome to the last unit, Unit 6. Here's my group on Marquise.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Gabriel.
All right, so this is the last one. I really, I went with the 2016 Museum Edition because this is the one that I didn't read, like out of all the other ones. And I found things quite a bit interesting. I know it's a pretty old report, but I really hope that we're going to apply the methods that I'm about to name. They talked a lot about cross-institutional collaboration. I think that's very important because if you connect all of the libraries that's in Houston, I mean, the big one downtown is very well known. And even at U of H, like there's two prominent libraries that's there. And I wonder how do they communicate, throughout the other libraries? Like what is your methods of really just bringing everything full scope? Because I know like if you look up a book at one library, and let's say they don't have it, they'll say, "Oh, well, we'll check with another library." But let's say that communication was cut off, like that would not be a customer friendly experience. And they also talked about like incorporating technology into looking up those things because I mean you can look up a book with the IBSN number, like school, library book, any book that you want. Every book has a number that you can kind of look up to, which we all do that right now. Like that's the thing right now in school. You can look on Amazon. Um, what's the other one? Barnes and Nobles, like anyone that you need, like you can find a lot of your books. And what I found odd is that why did they emphasize on that in 2016 when I'm pretty sure that's been a thing for a very long time. But what I found out is a lot of smaller libraries don't have that resource. So it was kind of odd as you guys are libraries, but why aren't you guys incorporating that? I mean, that should be a system wide thing. So I really feel like they're really trying to push the cross institutional collaboration because even if let's say they have all the resources in the world, um, a small library in a rural community probably won't have it. So it's like, what do you do? So they're really pushing the collaboration amongst all libraries, no matter few in Houston, small town in Texas. They're really building a system. From what I'm hearing, they've already built the system. Now, is it being incorporated? That's to be determined. But I feel like it is. And I feel like that's a very substantial thing to really look into because I don't spend a lot of time in the library, but when I do, they have all the answers, like literally all the answers that you need. Whether it's a book, an article, I mean, they will bring you stuff from 1868, and you're like, okay, I didn't even know nothing about this. So I found that very interesting. Another thing they talked about was the data analytics for museum operations. Now, this is one that threw me off because I thought it's kind of creepy, honestly. They are tracking the experience through it's called the iBeacon. It's a low energy Bluetooth signal that tracks people as they're walking through the library. Like, what's their interactions? How are they doing? What's their experience? Are they looking up stuff? Like, what are you doing? As you navigate through the library. I mean, the museum. What is your experience? Like, are you interested? Are you bored? Are you just looking at other stuff? Like, are you there for a field trip? Like, what is your experience? So, they've really looked into that, and they are actually using that to track how can we incorporate something like mobile wise and to get them to come back because sometimes when you go to the museum you go one time, that's it, you're done for maybe that year, those 2 3 years. The last time I went was for a school project and that was about 3 years ago. I haven't went since. So I definitely see a use for that. And they are really pushing the smartphone interactive activities because to get a lot of people, young people engaged with the museum, let's be honest, everybody's in their phone from you could be 3 years old up until somebody's grandmother. They're trying to figure out ways to incorporate um, just usefulness of those people time because I'm not gonna lie, when I go to the museum, I see everybody with their phones out taking pictures. So what are you doing with those pictures? Are you posting them? Are you just saving them? Like they want to know because they really want to figure out how can we keep the action going and how can the news be spread to like say, hey, I had fun. It was pretty cool. You guys should go check it out. So they're really trying to monitor that. Um, and another thing that they're figuring out now, this is in England. They're using HD cameras placed throughout the museum. Now, I don't know how we feel about invading people's privacy, but it's in England. And it's going through like a recognition process to figure out the certain types of people and the kind of art that they're looking into because they're really talking about diversity because I think they were lacking in England. and they're trying to figure out, okay, well, if this set of people come in, what are they going to? What are they like? Can we bring more of that in? Because if we only have one set of art that's in the museum, we're not making use of our space. So I find it to be different, if that makes sense. And I don't know if we would ever incorporate that into the US because we love privacy here, and they'll probably strike that down in a second. But I think it's useful, just not in terms of the camera part. I think if you're tracking data with the system, that's okay. And they should also give people the option to allow or to not allow. So this one was pretty interesting because it touched on a lot of technology, which I think is essential as we move forward into 2021 and beyond. Technology has just become a staple, and you either got to get with it or get left behind. So that's what I found interesting in the 2016 museum article. I didn't want to touch on all the other things because a lot of people had already mentioned those, and I really had to dig deep and figure out what was, I guess, important enough to mention it in this particular video on this particular report. So I will hand it off to Sarah.
Okay, well, that was really interesting, Marquise. I really enjoyed that. You don't really think about like technology, how it has a huge impact on just everything nowadays. I mean, I used to work at Space Center Houston, and when COVID hit, they had a augmented reality tour that you can view online because a lot of people couldn't go into the museums because of COVID at the time. So they uploaded like different tours on their website that you can actually go through and look on your phone through the mobile app. So I really thought that was cool that they're implementing stuff like that. So maybe they could implement something like that in the museums all over like the United States and even the world. And if people don't feel comfortable like going into the museum, they can look on the little apps or something and see the exhibits. I mean, that would be pretty cool, in my opinion.
I think they should. I think they're already trying to do something like that, but it's just a matter of, I'm sure there's resources that got to be involved in that. I'm sure a high-powered museum that has a lot of resources that's backed by the community and the government probably can do it, but those smaller ones, I hope that's where the cross collaboration comes into play. So we'll see.
I get that.
I actually read through part of that report because I had made the mistake of putting the same report twice. And so I was on the lookout to do a new one. And so I read through part of the one you read, Marquise, and I remember feeling very similar. It just kind of stung to read about those efforts of you being tracked through a museum or the cameras. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, we don't think twice about giving up our digital rights as long as it comes hidden through a new app that makes us part of the zeitgeist or hip and cool. We don't think twice. We don't go through and read the permissions that we're giving these apps to basically just rummage through our phone and just mine for data. And so I think maybe that's where kind of a shift in the way that we think may be helpful, because we don't think twice about that with our phone. Why would we think twice about it for a museum experience, but very much like you, I was a little creeped out. Like I said, I had to think about it for a little bit.
No, I got you. I think for me, I probably, just if it can make it better, I would probably allow it. But I know because I worked at Apple and I kind of know the ins and outs of certain things. But I know people who have came into that store and was like, "What is this on my phone?" I do not remember saying I allow or just giving permission, when in fact they did.
They did, yeah.
I can see where you hit yes, like because I have the authority to say to go in there and look. Oh, I don't remember that, and I get it. You just hit yes, allow, get out the way, But I think if it's beneficial to the person, they really don't mind. But if it's not beneficial and they're kind of iffy about it and it doesn't reflect like how they feel in that moment, they're gonna be like, "Nah, I don't want it because it's a made problem." Like, use Apple Pay, and I'm like, it is safer than actually using your actual credit card because it incorporates a new number every time you use it, and once you use it, that number dies instantly after you're done. But I can explain that 20 million ways. They still would hate it or not like it.
It has a lot to do with just how we feel as consumers, right? Yeah. If something feels safe, hey, here, sign me up, yes, and you don't think twice about it. But if it stings, then I don't know about that museum experience where they're going to track me,
True.
So to each their own. But sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to steal your phone.
Cut you off. Oh, no, we're sorry, Sarah.
The article that I read was the 2020 Horizon Report, and I mainly looked at the scenarios. And a quote that actually stood out to me was, it says, any action plan we formulate today is based on assumptions about what is likely to happen tomorrow, which I think was pretty interesting, because technology is ever changing, just like education. So one thing can work today, but it might not work in the next 5 years. So that's why it's constantly changing. And one of the aspects that they talked about in this section was growth. And they stated that basically in the United States that it's not uniform across all institutional types, and that the only thing that they've seen growth from is individuals with some college credits, but not with any degrees. And that's about 30 million in 2020. So that was like 30 million people last year. And they said that progress was made on equity and inclusion, but it's slow, but it's steady. Scaling of the adaptive learning, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then they said that the economy was able to sustain growth. So they are seeing some kind of growth going, but it's not really uniform and it's not consistent in that area. So that's something that I think we could work on as a nation. Another thing they talked about was the constraint, and the problem they had found was that higher education struggles to appeal to emerging student populations, and that they claim to new compelling value. So a solution would be like they need to have the higher education needs to adopt a culture of operating and accomplishing more with less. So like, with the whole education system, like with the whole museums, like Marquise had talked about, I don't know if it was this article, but it was another article that I read where the main problem that they're finding is with keeping the education or the colleges like stable and open is they're having like the smaller, sorry, I have no idea where my brain is right now. The smaller universities, they're having a hard time keeping open because of their costs, because they're not able to keep it open because like COVID, COVID had a huge factor. So they're collapsing, which is another thing that I was about to talk about. Like the state funds were gutted, widely unaffordable. Online learning has offered cheaper and affordable prices for colleges, which is something that's able for the smaller universities to be open because they're offering online services. But because of COVID, a lot of kids didn't want to go into college or on campus. So they were having a hard time staying open. Unlike the big universities where they can have more people come in or they can have online access. So that's another thing that they talked about. I mean, it's kind of really sad in my opinion, because I mean, if you have like a good school that's a smaller university and it's not open because of COVID and people are not coming in, they need to kind of accommodate and make something happen, because some people can't afford to go to a private university like Harvard or Stanford or wherever, like some people can only go to like community colleges and then transfer to university. And I mean, it just depends on how much they get paid and like what they can afford. So that's something that really stood out to me, and I can't remember what article it was, but it just kind of stuck with me all this whole time. And the last thing they talked about was transformation, and they said that education was recognized as a valuable resource, which it really is. I mean, if you think about it, you learn every day, even if you don't even think you're learning. Like you can learn how to, with Apple, you can learn how to work an iPhone. If you went from Samsung's iPhone, you can learn so much stuff with iPhones. I mean, they have an app on there. I think it's called Tips or something like that, where you can learn about your iPhone. I don't know.
No, there's an app. I mean, it's called Tips and Tutorials. That thing will teach you. I mean, it can go from basic all the way up until how to
right.
Start using Adobe. It just depends on what's your skill set, what's your
right.
how do you
exactly. And so they said that the wealthiest and largest institutions needed to address the key issue of cost. So with bigger universities, cost is not really a problem for them because they have a lot of people coming in and like paying them. But with smaller institutions, it's hard for them to stay afloat because there's so many key factors that are, get involved with like everything, like staying afloat. So that's why they offered online learning so that it can help them, get some income coming in. And then the last thing I'm going to end with is they said by 2027, there's going to be an option to have an AI or a artificial intelligence companion in the classroom. And they state that roughly 75% of residential students now use AI companions. And as a consequence, the rates of depression and mental distress have decreased significantly. So I think that's pretty good. I mean, because I talked about mental health like in the last couple of units and how mental health is a huge factor, especially with technology and, being home alone all day, if that's still what you do, like if you work remotely, you don't have human interaction. I mean, that can really like have a huge impact on your mental health. So they're coming out with artificial intelligence companions to use in the classroom and just to use in general. And they have noticed from what they have done so far is that it's helping people with their mental health and their stress, and it's helping them to like cope with their depression or their anxiety. So I thought that was pretty interesting overall.
Nice. Before I share my piece, I love listening to NPR while I'm driving. And over the last year and a half, they've done some excellent pieces on exactly what you were talking about regarding higher education and the validity of it, how it's really transformed regarding accessibility during COVID for all these students. And just like you said, there's an entire generation that are missing out, particularly minorities, people of color. And I think that's very telling. It's one of those symptoms that we don't really think too much of, but we're going to feel what that impact is. And it's not going to be maybe as immediate as other symptoms, but a few years down the road, we're going to really miss out on all the positives that happen because of higher education. So I would invite you all to definitely take a look. It's no one specific report because they've done it throughout, but I'm a big fan of them, so I thought I'd make that plug. So for me, I read the 27, I actually read a couple of reports. Like I said, I wanted to find one because I made the mistake of choosing the same one twice. But I ended up with a 2017 report on Nordic schools. Several of our colleagues had mentioned this, and so I really wanted to read through it and see what it offered. And to kind of summarize it, I really thought it did a awesome job. I feel like it took the best pieces of all the other reports all in one. And honestly, it made me want to go check out the schools over there because it made me excited. I think they chose, the best parts out of all the reports, and then that's just what they do on a regular basis. So that's the way I would summarize it. But there's a few things that definitely stood out to me. One of them has to do with the substandard H regarding recruiting and retaining highly competent personnel. And for me, one of the ways that you do that they spoke about in the report is really thinking about the curriculum and how to transform them. So some of our colleagues have discussed how they've incorporated the arts into STEAM. And I think that's one of those ways that you don't typically think of when you want to retain top talent. You want to make sure you're on the cutting edge of teaching and learning, because it makes educators excited. You want to be a part of something that you feel is worthwhile. And I think that translates into your retention numbers. In education, the numbers of retention are abysmal. Most teachers, we all know the reality. And so I thought that was a really neat connection that existed between the substandard and then the material. And then another one that really caught my attention, it doesn't get too much notice, but they talked throughout the report about coding as literacy. And the connection that I made was to substandard I for administrators, because I think that those innovative ideas are a direct result of strategic partnerships. Because if your educators on campus don't have the expertise or the knowledge, then you need to create those partnerships between you and whoever in the community is offering those partnerships, whether it's Apple, whether it's employees at IBM that can come in and kind of help you build that bridge. So that was another part that caught my attention. And then the other one that caught my attention, and this is substandard A for coaches. And this one kind of really made me reflect quite a bit in my experience, because throughout the report, they talked about all these cutting edge technologies that are going all throughout their schools. And it made me think back on how it relates to coaches. And this is not a blanket statement for all coaches, but enough to make me reflect on how coaches typically tend to be much more seasoned educators that have been around for a while. And they tend to hold on to kind of these old school strategies that are tried and true. And that hesitancy is noticeable, that hesitancy to reach out for new technologies or things that are more cutting edge, where for younger people, it's a lot more seamless, that transition to using and adopting those new technologies. And I thought it was really important because I don't think that happens enough. So those were three of the things that caught my attention throughout this report. I was a big fan just reading through it. It really made me excited about going out and checking out those schools. So that's it for me.
Yeah, I actually read that article like 3 times. But it was like, I didn't realize it when I was doing the whole like unit list that she had us do at the beginning, but then I realized it was like certain parts that I would read. So like out of all of the articles, I think that one was my favorite, just because like you said, it once I actually wanted to go travel over there and be like, okay, so what are we going to learn today, you know? Because like, yeah. I mean, the fact that they were doing all of that, incorporating all of that technology and engineering and all that stuff back in 2017 is like just crazy.
Yes.
Like,
you know, the other thing that really struck me is the very pragmatic view that they approached all these ideas and efforts with. It wasn't like some of the other efforts where they really documented these roundabout ways. No, it was, hey, you know what? This effort impacts our national economy. Let's go ahead and, you know, implement this throughout our schools. And I thought that was, I mean, we tend to make things so complicated when sometimes they're just the simplest things. We just, you know.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's it for me.
Read that report, but I feel like I'm going to have to go back and just take a look at it just to see what they have to offer.
Yeah.
To touch on what you said about the coding, if a school may not have the resource to bring coding and literacy into their program, like at Apple, I was one of the summer camp coaches, and to help the kids code. Now it ranged from ages, from 3 to about 14. And when I say those classes were booked up the entire summer, parents will come in, they can sit with the kids, the younger ones, if that makes sense, but the other ones can do it on their own. Those kids really did enjoy that. They were doing a coding on the iPad, and it was a little robot, and you had to kind of direct it throughout the maze that we kind of put throughout the store. Those kids love that, and it's free. It's free. They offer it. Well, we'll see this year, but they offer it every year in the summer from like June 12th to about July 31st. You can sign up as many times as you want. You can bring anybody you want, as long as they fall within the age range. They should extend it, but I guess they figure that maybe those kids can kind of look at it on their own. But from about 3 to about 13 or 14, that really gave kids some excitement about coding, because honestly, back when I was 13 and 14, they didn't have that. I mean, they didn't have that resource to go to an Apple store and say, hey, I want to do coding. And when you think coding, you think HTML, CSS, like all this stuff, because I took a coding class. It's no joke. I mean, it's serious business. If you mess up, you get frustrated, and it kind of builds up, your resiliency to kind of push through. But I feel like if the schools may not have the resource, they should definitely look into those other companies to say, hey, what do you offer that, is free or low cost that we can afford to kind of get our kids, excited about just anything that would keep their minds flowing. So
yeah.
I feel like that's a good resource, and Apple has done a great job with that, because that thing is advertised very well, because parents come like every summer signing their kids up.
Yeah.
So I think that, if you can't afford it or can't, you don't have the resource, definitely look into those bigger companies, because they do have those resources, because they can afford it to just usher out stuff like that. So, yeah.
Check it out, man. I want to say it's the shortest report out of all the ones that I read.
Yeah.
But it's dense. It's good stuff. It really is. I keep saying, I think they cherry picked the best parts out of all of them just because that's what they do. So check it out, man. I highly recommend it.
And I want to know, will they update it, since it is 2021, how are they holding up now?
Yeah, kind of going back to what Sarah said earlier, that they were doing all this way back, you know, and really 5 years in the grand scheme of things is not a lot. But when you talk about technology adoption, that's a lifetime, you
No,
know?
especially when you're dealing with the innovation of so many different things. And kids nowadays are heavily involved in technology. So I feel like, I mean, they're on the right track, honestly. I feel like here in the US, we are individualists and everybody want to do their own thing. They don't want to, you know, we can't agree on one thing or the other. That's really what it's about. They cannot agree on one thing. And if you do agree on it, it's got to pass through all these laws, and you know it's going to get stopped there because the political atmosphere comes into play. So it's just a lot of different roadblocks, if that makes sense, into us getting where we want to go. But we'll get there, though, hopefully.
All right, so that's it. All
Okay.
right, thank you for watching, guys and gals.